Welcome to Eye on the Cure, a podcast from the Foundation Fighting Blindness, providing science research, news, and insights about the world of vision and blinding diseases.
Welcome, everyone, to the Eye on the Cure podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shaberman with the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and I'd like to thank Johnson & Johnson and Boehringer Ingelheim for sponsoring this episode. And for this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Victoria Clare, who is coming to us from her home in the UK. And remarkably, Victoria has commissioned more than 200 sculptures throughout her lifetime. She's received an honorary doctorate of arts from the University of Manchester and is working on a PhD. So Victoria is blind from retinitis pigmentosa, and she's a fierce advocate for the visually impaired community. And what brought her to my attention recently was her exhibition called The Sense of Sculpture in Wakefield, and Wakefield in England is just south of Leeds. And it's a show, the Sense of Sculpture is a show where guests experience 8 sculptures in complete darkness. And I really look forward to talking to Victoria more about that in a moment. But first, welcome to the podcast, Victoria. It's great to have you with us.
Hi, Ben, and thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Well, the pleasure is ours. There's a lot to talk about, and I've gone through many of your impressive achievements in your life, but I don't think from an earlier discussion, the way your life turned out wasn't exactly what you planned initially when you were younger. Can you talk about what your life was like before your RP diagnosis, and tell us about that diagnosis and how it kind of changed your trajectory?
Yeah, sure, Ben. I mean, you're absolutely right. It certainly wasn't the sort of the way I thought my life was going to turn out. I was already in art college studying for a graphic design course, actually. Graphic design was more commercial, and obviously there was more scope to kind of carve a career out in the commercial arts. But this was before I fell in love with sculpture. And actually, I fell in love with sculpting before I actually got diagnosed with my RP, which is kind of ironic in a way when you look back on that, because obviously graphic design is something that is extremely visually orientated. However, sculpture is the beautiful medium of touch. It's so, sensory and tactile. So it's almost like the unseen universal energy was saying, hold on a minute, let's put something in here that will take her on a different pathway because something's on its way. So yes, I was just kind of like a usual student, to be honest with you, Ben, enjoying art college, having lots of good fun and good times with my friends, and doing field trips and really enjoying life, really. I had a boyfriend, which was a very serious kind of 3-year relationship. I had a driver's license. So I was enjoying my car. And yeah, life was okay. But as you can imagine, once I was diagnosed with RP, it kind of it was like the bottom fell out of my world, really. I was 19 and I really didn't expect the news that I got, obviously. My plan before I was diagnosed was to continue my love of sculpture by getting onto a figurative sculpture degree, for which I did do. It was only 28 places in the whole of Europe, which was quite a prestigious course in Staffordshire University, and really quite a punt on their part, really, because I was training in graphic design, so I didn't really have a portfolio of evidence of sculptural works, but obviously they could see, potential in me. And the idea was to go and get the degree and then continue on to get the qualification so I could be a university lecturer. That was always the plan. I never had a plan of being a practitioner, a freelance artist. That just wasn't what I wanted to do. But the diagnosis changed that trajectory hugely. Initially, obviously, massively in my personal life. I basically lost everything, unfortunately, at the age of 19. And that's the gateway to the rest of your life. And I was standing right in that gateway. And to have this news was quite earth-shattering for me because it just took away everything I thought my life was gonna be like. Unfortunately, my boyfriend left me. Unfortunately, I lost my driver's license and I had to leave that university degree for figurative sculpture because it was just too much for me. Part of RP, as I'm sure you know, is night blindness. And I was really struggling for the first week of university with that situation, and it was making it quite hard for me. So, in the end, I had to walk away from that, which was devastating.
Certainly, certainly. And I want to talk a little more about what drew you to sculpture. Did you, even before the RP diagnosis, just get drawn to it because of the tactile sensation? And did that change over time as you lost vision?
Yes, I think the first thing about sculpture that has always drawn me to it is its tactile touch, haptic touch. The fact that you can feel the work and not just have to look at the work, I think was a real way for me to kind of engage, if you like, initially. However, it was literally just so there was a book in my library that hadn't been put away on the shelf correctly, and it was just laying there. And I was looking for inspiration on the course that I was already on, which happens to be the course before the graphic design art college course. And I was doing my sort of final major project. And obviously the advice from the tutors was stick to what you know, do what what you're best at. But this sculpture book, this carving book, was just sitting there and it just enthralled me. I just, at the time, obviously I had vision. So I just sat there and just felt so excited, flicking the pages and looking at works by people like Barbara Hepworth and Henry Moore and just thinking, my God, I want to do something like this. I really, really do. So I put it to my tutors at the time. They thought I was crazy and said, no, you've got to do a graphic design piece. That's after all, your place at art college for graphic design is hanging in the wings. So, you can't afford to mess this up. Me being me, I did it anyway. That's me all over, Ben. So if I feel like I need to do something, then I will do it, regardless as to what other people will think of that. So I decided to sculpt a full-size dolphin. I was 17 and never really had much experience with wood. My dad had a great workshop and I used to often go in and out of his workshop and get involved with his tools and whatnot. So I guess there was a little bit of influence there. But when I started to create this dolphin, something just happened inside of me that has never left me since. And it's a connection to material, it's a connection to myself, and it's a way of articulation of what I was feeling. So sculpture for me is so much more than, than just a piece of artwork.
That's great. And in preparing for this interview, I was thinking back to when I was a little kid and we used clay in school, when we were, of course, very young and there was Play-Doh. I don't know if kids use Play-Doh anymore, but those were very fun experiences. I loved working with clay. I loved Play-Doh and stuff like that. But, most people, you stop working with tactile art, at a very young age. I find it sort of sad that we don't do more sculpture in our world in general. I think it's such a beautiful thing, not only visually, but obviously to touch. And I was curious, do you have favorite materials that you use? I know that you use wood in some cases. Do you use other materials?
Majorly, I am a wood carver, so it is majorly different varieties of wood, but I have used many different types of material in the past. I've created works from plaster, creating armatures, which is, kind of, I guess, a skeleton, and then you then begin to build up with the plaster over the top of that. I've used plaster in the way where it's already kind of dried and it's a block, and then you carve it. So obviously the carving technique and methods come through by using it in that way. I've had a little go at marble as well, and I have done and still do use quite a lot of clay. I use clay more for teaching now when I'm doing my lecturing and I'm actually doing my workshop, which I'll tell you a little bit about that a little bit later on. But yeah, the materials I think are important because each material you engage with has a different response. And I think the thing that drew me to wood is it's such a rich, warm sort of material to engage with. It's always different. Every piece of wood is individual. You'll always get a different response from that wood, be it a texture, be it a sort of the weight of it, the density of it, and the response that you get from as yourself as you use your tools. It's a beautiful experience.
Interesting. And is there a particular type of wood that is more amenable to sculpture?
In general, most woods that you sculpt are usually a very tight grain, so hardwoods. You can sculpt in softwoods, but it's not as technically easy, and you won't get the kind of finish, the higher finish, polished finish that you do with hardwoods. So you're looking at things like sapelli wood, tulip wood, beech, elm, those kinds of close grain woods.
Right, right. Okay. So tell us about some of your early works and exhibitions. How did you get started in showing your work? Because that's not an easy thing to do.
It isn't actually. And do you know what, Ben? Initially, I never even thought about exhibiting. It was more about kind of back in the early days, I left that university place, which was, as I said, rather hard for me after the diagnosis. And I took some time out. I just needed to lick my wounds and figure out how I was going to go forward. That took a while, about a year and a half of contemplation and kind of self reflection. But I kind of came out of that place through actually engaging with sculpture because even though I didn't get the degree, I knew deep down inside of me that I had the capability that hadn't gone away, the skill and the talent and everything I needed to do it was still within me. So I decided to kind of take a few logs from my dad's garden at the time and get my toolbox out. It was all packed up from coming back from uni, and I started to sculpt, and that was a very therapeutic sort of action for me. It really was. It articulated what I was going through emotionally, and obviously it kind of got me to realize actually I can still do this. It's absolutely a possibility, but it just needs reframing. By that, I mean, it looks like I'm going to have to be a practicing artist. I'm going to have to be a freelance artist. So I created two pieces of work initially, figurative pieces, roughly around tabletop size. And I took them down to a local gallery and they loved them. And they said, yeah, definitely, we'll put them in and we'll see what happens. Within 2 weeks, both pieces had sold, which was amazing for me, and also gave me the realization that, oh, okay, I could actually be a commissioned artist, you know. So that started my freelance artist journey, really. And over the space of 20 years, I have sculpted pieces for clients all over the world: Australia, America, Ireland, Italy. There's parts of me, should we say, all over the world, which is a real honor, actually. And it took me to about 2012 to realize, wow, I've never actually had an exhibition of my own. So I've been this commissioned artist for all these years. And I'd been part of kind of group exhibitions with other artists, but I'd never actually had a solo exhibition. So that was a bit of a red rag to a bull, really, because I thought, okay, if I've not done it, I want to do it. So that's when I created my first collection of work, which was a 16 piece exhibition called Through the Eyes of Time. The concept and the theme of the exhibition was very much about articulation of my life, really. To be fair, that's mainly what my work reflects and my experiences. And it was flagged up with a beautiful piece of work called Time, which depicted a face, half a face, with a piercing where the eye socket would be. And then I suspended a clock face for the pupil of the eye. And obviously that piece was really, really influential because it was the narrative for the whole exhibition, which was through the eyes of time, you know, trying to depict the vision going, you know, and what that meant to me. That exhibition went so well that I actually had my MP, Mr. Gordon Henderson, came along as a special guest. Loved the work so much that he then balloted for my exhibition to go up to the House of Commons in London, which was quite unheard of, actually, but it was successfully balloted. And the Through the Eyes of Time collection went up, and I displayed it up in the upper waiting hall of the House of Commons. So really, the first exhibition probably opened up everything from that. You know, I had many exhibitions from the Through the Eyes of Time collection. So that ended up going on tour around the southeast of England. I also created other exhibitions of different collections throughout that time as well. And then the Through the Eyes of Time exhibition ended up in the House of Commons. So yeah, quite a quick kind of introduction to arts and culture in the exhibiting world.
That's amazing that you made it into the House of Commons so early in your career. That really speaks to your talent. And I want to let our listeners know that at the end of the podcast, I'm going to ask you where people can see your work. We're going to talk about your current exhibition, but there are ways to see your work online. And
Yeah.
I want people to definitely get that opportunity. And one thing I'm curious about, when you started sculpting, you still had some vision. You were earlier in your RP journey, but now you are down to basically light sensitivity, if I understand correctly. Has the way you sculpt changed because now you can't see actually what you're working on? Do you envision what you're creating in your head?
Yes, it has changed dramatically in terms of how I actually engage with the material. So, as you said, the earlier kind of stages of RP leaves, I had a lot of residual vision. So, obviously, I would use that residual vision. And as the vision was kind of diminishing, I would keep adapting and making adjustments to my studio to create high contrast, you know, just to illuminate what I had so I could, you know, kind of still use that residual vision. But there's only so long that you can do that. And it wasn't until 2016 where I finally took the leap and was trained with a long cane. I should have used a cane many years ago, Ben. I mean, to be fair, looking back on it now. But it took me a long time to accept what was happening to me. And to a degree, I was happy kind of hiding it because nobody could tell that I was losing my vision. So I didn't have to tell people if I didn't want to. And people didn't know any different, but I was having a lot of accidents around and around my environment, not able to keep myself as safe as I once did. And there's only so long you can live like that. So I took the leap of faith and I trained with that cane. But what an incredible thing to do, because it showed me a whole new way of life in terms of independence, autonomy, and freedom. And I learned a sense of trust in myself that I hadn't had for so long. And I was out on my own for the first time in 20 odd years, all on my own at night time, which was such a revelation to me, really. So that really showed me anything was possible, even in the dark when you can't see anything. And I think I allowed that process to come through my artistic process. So what I started to do, and this kind of went alongside the exhibition Blinder Sixth Sense, which is the first of its concept. As we've said, we'll speak about the sense of sculpture, but Blinder Sixth Sense was the first exhibition that I did where I put the work in a completely dark space, in a gallery space, and it had never been done before in the UK. And that mainly came about because, again, of the process that I had, the revelation of using that cane. And I started to create my work in a very different way. I no longer tried to illuminate it with lighting, with contrasting colours. I just turned the lights off. I just went in the dark and I just started to feel what I was doing. I started to engage sensorially with my work. I started to engage through my body, through my memory, and through my visceral responses. And it was a beautiful transition because, yes, it changed the work, but I believe it was changed for the better. My work has become more symbolic, and by that, it's more form and shape orientated. It's a lot smoother finished. It's just more engaging in a sensory manner. So it was quite a revelation when that happened.
That's a remarkable transition in your sculpting work. So do you think that your brain actually adapted to the vision loss to help you perhaps visualize what you were trying to create?
I do. I believe now I understand much more greatly on a much more academic level. Obviously, as you've mentioned, I'm currently doing a PhD, and I have had so much research and reading, and the things I'm learning is really helping my information and kind of making more sense to the process that took place. So what happens with our visual cortex is, obviously, you would think it would become dormant once vision is no longer, kind of being translated to the visual cortex. However, what actually does happen is the brain adapts, as you've said, and it creates a space within the visual cortex that becomes more of a sensorial cortex. So we then take vision out of it completely, and it's replaced. The information that is coming through is replaced with the senses, not just the four senses, but the embodied knowledge that we all hold as well. So every way that we can be informed will come through into that space that was once the visual cortex, which I just find remarkable, actually.
Well, thanks for that bit of science. I know I interviewed a musician, Matthew Whitaker, who was part of a study. He's totally blind. He's an excellent jazz musician. And they showed using MRI that his visual cortex would light up when he played music.
Mm.
So it's the same kind of thing. The brain is so plastic and adaptable.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah. It really is.
So, or you've alluded to your teaching a little bit. Tell us more about that. Do you think your blindness helped increase and boost your passion for teaching? Because you're obviously a learner and you obviously enjoy teaching. How do you think blindness influenced those?
I think I've always been somebody of self-inquiry, then, which has always informed me to, want to learn about myself and my experiences, and also how those experiences has impacted my, my psychological sort of side of me. So in some respects, the researcher becomes the subject is the researcher, which made me a perfect fit for a PhD. But also it really works very passionately when I'm teaching and I'm lecturing, because I have such a passion to want to create change in society for people. I believe that the only place we can create change in a really kind of long, meaningful manner is through education. It's harder to create change with society when we have so many kind of restrictions and beliefs that we all buy into. Whereas when we're in a learning environment, we're much more open to looking at things outside of the box, really. So I do believe that my blindness and my experience of blindness has not just been, informed through the art that I create, but I believe it's now making a difference in education.
I definitely agree with you that education is so vital to so many things we do, whether it's art, understanding the world, any topic. The more you know, the more you learn. One thing I'm curious about is your students, because now you're teaching. Of course, you're totally blind. How do you think they respond to you when they learn or they see that you are totally blind?
I think they're very open to when they first meet me. So I've been working at the University of Greater Manchester now for nearly 2.5, 3 years. And I'm just about to go up there next week and work with my new first year students, fine art degree students. And it's always really interesting because those new students have never met me. So initially, I go in and I do a little talk. I show them some of my work and I speak of my life, really. But that's a really good introduction, I think, because it allows them into who I am, not just as an artist, not just as an educator, but as a person. And then it kind of just unfolds from there, really. And what I find is they're so interested in learning different ways of processing artistically. They're really interested in engaging in their other senses to see how that can inform their work. So they are very, very open and yeah, actually very helpful to me as well in many ways. They just kind of get on board with it and, very much are there. Really, it's a beautiful experience just for all of us, I think.
I can imagine it is. And I'm presuming your teaching style, because you don't have eyesight, may be a little different from the typical sculpting teacher. And I'm sure your story is very inspiring. And you received an honorary doctorate from the University of Manchester. And the first thing I'm wondering is, how does one get an honorary doctorate? You hear about this for famous people. How did that come about for you?
Well, it's an interesting story actually, Ben, because it involves meeting a lovely man called George E. Holmes, who at the time was at an award ceremony that I happened to be at. I was asked by the Hospital Radio Broadcasting Association to come and do a conference piece and talk at their conference. I was doing a little radio show as a little part-time sideline, and so they said, "Yeah, we'd love to hear how a blind person does a radio show." So I went along and I spoke about it, and then I was invited to go to the award ceremony in the evening. So I sat at the top table with the president of the Hospital Broadcasting Association and many other people at the time, but also George E. Holmes. He was in his other role at the time, which was Lord Lieutenant to the King, due to the fact that the King couldn't make that particular award ceremony. So the Lord Lieutenant steps in and he's there to kind of advocate there. We got talking, and it turned out that George loves Barbara Hepworth. And of course, that then meant I got to show him my work. I had some examples of pieces of work on my phone. And pretty much that's how it happened. He literally came over at the end of the evening and said, "You'll be hearing from me." I didn't really think much of it, to be fair, but he's a man of his word. And it must have been about a month, 6 weeks later, I received the offer to be an honorary Doctor of the Arts, which of course I accepted and found quite emotional, actually, because the fact that I'd been recognised over 30 years of experience, but also outstanding contribution to public arts. So it really was an honour for me.
Most certainly. What a great story. And for our listeners who aren't in the UK or Europe, even those of us in the States, George Holmes, was he like a representative or a surrogate for the king? Is that how
So,
that happened?
yeah, the Lord Lieutenant, I think basically we have regional Lord Lieutenants all over the country. So we have this role is for them to kind of step into certain engagements, shall we say, with which maybe the royalty can't attend. And I should say actually that George is or was Vice Chancellor for the university. So that was his other role. Hence why he was able to offer me that honorary doctorate.
So you got this honorary doctorate. You're an active teacher. You're exhibiting. You've accomplished so much in your life. But then you decided to pursue a PhD. That's pretty ambitious. Tell us about that work, which you're doing right now.
Right. So what with obviously all of the newfound engagement with the University of Greater Manchester, I was actually approached by them to do this PhD by professional practice. It wasn't something that I thought I could ever do. I never thought I would. I always thought in my mind, I'm a creative, I'm not an academic, and never dreamt that could be a possibility. But it was a colleague and my now supervisor, Professor Jerome Carson, who saw this potential. He looked at my work, he loved my work, he looked at my history, and really thought that this could warrant a PhD by professional practice. So a PhD by professional practice is slightly different to a kind of 5-year thesis-based PhD. It's a PhD that looks retrospectively back at a profession. So, and then you kind of you're building evidence with a portfolio, and you're also writing critical commentary to kind of go along with that portfolio of evidence. So it's quite interesting, and yeah, it's taken me into realms that I never thought I would step into, but I am loving it. Honestly, I love study. I love to learn. I'm loving the research behind it, and it's taken me into to parts of not just myself, but also, looking at that how, visual impairment looks for, I suppose, how it feels more importantly as a sort of way of how we navigate in the environment. Is that circumstantial? Is that just a knowledge, or could there be more to it? That's a question around anthropology that I look forward to sort of unveiling.
So, to help me understand a little better, are you looking at how visual impairment shapes your interaction with the world? This and other
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. So as a kind of, I guess, as a bit of a post PhD project, this has come about. So my actual PhD is entitled Carving a Way Through Blindness. It's an autoethnographical account of creativity, embodied sensory cognition, and post-traumatic growth. Those three things are indeed what have built my journey, obviously my creative practice, my sensory and embodied cognition, that very way of living as a blind person, and the post-traumatic growth that I have received through, kind of the journey of sight loss. So that's what the core of this project is about. And then as I've kind of unfolded and unveiled this inquiry, the questions around, anthropology have popped up for me. And that is something that I'm quite deeply passionate about uncovering. So I think that will be the sort of the step on from once I've got the PhD.
That's remarkable work. And obviously, or at least obviously to me, that will greatly inform the public about the journey uh, of someone with vision loss. But I think it has so many universal implications, regardless of what your disability or trauma might be. And this could really have a dramatic impact on the way we deal with those scenarios.
I believe so, because I think, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what that trauma is, what that adversity looks like, what that disability involves. It's all psychological impact to the person that is going through it. And post-traumatic growth is something that is very possible. It's not possible for everybody, but it is possible. Tedeschi and Calhoun created the infantry of post-traumatic growth, and I won't bore you with it, but kind of a few of the principles are resilience, personal identity, and strength. Those are some of the core principles with which post-traumatic growth can take place. And for me, I believe that creativity has helped me as an aid to recovery and as a vessel to come through and find that post-traumatic growth within myself. And I guess I'm just so more, inquiry is my thing, right? So now I'm just questioning everything, and it excites me, and I want to know, epistemology of blind people. It's just knowledge, but we are so much more than knowledge. There is so much more there. A scholar that is somebody that I'm studying and has actually had the honor of speaking to, Georgina Cleed. I know that her book, More Than Meets the Eye, again, is very influential on this subject. But I hope to be able to take it one step further and prove that blind people and how we live isn't just about the knowledge that we hold. It's actually how we actually live in our lives by doing. The act of doing becomes more than knowledge. It becomes a possible potential anthropology. So that's something that excites me for the future.
That really does sound exciting. And in my role at the foundation over the many years, I've always been amazed and inspired by how people with vision loss persevere and really grow and do some incredible things.
Mm.
And your study of that journey will be so, pardon the use of this term, enlightening for all of us, whether we have vision loss or not. So I look forward to your completion of your PhD and us learning what you learned. So thank you for that.
Yeah, the part of the PhD as well is to deliver my workshop, which is again, it's very unusual. It's probably completely out of the box in terms of education, but it's entitled Developing an Enhanced Cognition, Sensory Cognition by using a sensory approach, basically. I blindfold my students. I ask them to sit in complete silence of 10 minutes of contemplation in that blind space. And then I ask them to engage with their senses. I ask them to engage with their bodily knowledge, and I ask them to engage with their visceral knowledge. And then once they've done that, I get them to articulate those feelings that have come up through the clay that is in front of them. So they continue in that blind space, but they're just using that haptic touch, the somatic knowledge, the semantic knowledge, and their sensory knowledge to try to articulate those feelings about being blind. And the main aim for this workshop, which is actually run beside the sense of sculpture over the next 2 weeks, is to try and open up human understanding of who we are ourselves, because we as humans take in 80% of our information purely just through the dominance of vision, which I think is absolutely crazy, leaving only 20% to engage sensorially. And I think really the sighted world are missing out on a much richer embodied knowledge, sensory knowledge, and visceral knowledge to have a much rounded, more interactional, engaged life. You know, we seem to be such a visually orientated world, and I'm hoping to make a little bit of a difference in society on a more of a human science perspective as well.
Well, I'm sure you will through your work, but your life and your story alone have and are doing that. So
Thank you, Ben.
you're making a great impact.
Thank you.
And to wrap things up, I'd be remiss if we didn't come back to what we talked about early on, and that's your current exhibition in Wakefield in the UK. That Wakefield is somewhere near Leeds. I looked that up on a map.
Indeed, you're not far from Leeds.
And so tell us about the sense of sculpture. Tell us about your exhibition.
Okay, so the sense of sculpture is evolving exhibition from its first kind. So first time round, it was called Blindness, as I touched on earlier on. I created that exhibition shortly after the kind of epiphany, if you like, of using my cane, and it was 2018. I just wanted to articulate how wonderful it felt and what a gift it was to have independence through the dark space of being blind in the nighttime. So this kind of inspired a whole exhibition around placing sculpture in a pitch black gallery space. This had never been done in this country before. So it was quite a gamble, really. But I found the right gallery, a lovely, beautiful little gallery called Beach Creative in Kent. They've supported my work superbly in the past, so I knew that they would be very supportive of this. And I created 6 pieces of work. Each piece represented a sense, and then the 6th piece represented freedom, the trust, that 6th sense that I found. And then I invited people in to to experience it without vision, but using, their sense of touch and their sort of spatial awareness and see what happened. It had a lot of impact in terms of accessibility because obviously, unfortunately, our gallery spaces do not allow us to touch sculpture, which is a whole other conversation. And these exhibitions are all about touching. So, it was quite pioneering to be trying to change things within arts and culture. And it went extremely well, I have to say. It was very carefully designed. It had a tactile paving that went around in a square, which took you to each plinth where there was a sculpture. There was also a guide rope that did the same. So you held on to the guide rope. So there was these sort of health and safety issues that helped people navigate their space. And it was really super successful to the point where it was actually going to be proposed to the Turner Tate Gallery in Margate. But then, unfortunately, COVID hit, and that was kind of wiped out and wiped off the table, as was the things that was coming out of it as well. I was invited to speak at the Vision 2020 conference in Dublin. I actually became an ambassador because they heard about me, who are now called Retina UK. At the time, they were called RP Fighting Blindness. So a lot of things were coming out of it for me to go and advocate for others, really. So that's when the public speaking really started. And then, as I said, COVID came along, so it kind of changed things somewhat. And I guess Blind as Sixth Sense never really took off as to the degree it could have done. So it wasn't until I had a discussion with the director, Damon Jackson of the Art House at Wakefield. He'd heard about me through another colleague that I'd got in touch with and said to me, look, how would you feel about putting this on again? And I just said, well, do you know what? I thought I kind of moved on from it really. But sort of after sitting back and thinking, there's a lot more for this. There's a lot more could come out of this than, just kind of advocating for the blind and accessibility. I could make this very academic. I could most certainly make it part of my PhD and make it an interactional sort of an interactional response for the public and tie in the workshop. So I kind of, in the end, came round to thinking, yeah, okay, let's do it. So we changed the title. The core principle is the same. So the concept is the same. There's a completely pitch black gallery space in the gallery, and there are 8 pieces. And there is a guide rope that guides you round to each piece of work, where you are invited to perceive through your senses, engage through your body, and give meaning through your visceral and emotional intelligence. So they're the 3 core principles that I ask people to try and get in touch with. And it's really interesting because a lot of people have different reactions, and it really challenges people. It challenges themselves, their feelings, it challenges their reactions and their responses. But I think it's, again, another educational piece, really.
It sounds like such a unique and impressionable experience, whether you have vision, whether you don't. It's just not something that we do or we spend time doing, the tactile experience. And I think for people who have vision, it might be even more impressionable because we just don't spend time not using our vision.
Absolutely. I think this is definitely, there are larger responses, shall we say, from the sighted audience than the VI audience, because to a degree, the visually impaired, we're already there, so we have those skills honed very well. As I've said and touched upon, it is the way with which we have to live. So we kind of just do. But for the sighted world, that's very different. You're taking away something that's so dominant for them, and you're asking them to, kind of just take the distraction of vision away, but allow themselves to engage in a different way. So yeah, it's really very, very interesting.
Certainly. Most of the time when we go to a museum, whether it's art or other displays, it's do not touch.
Absolutely.
And in this case, that's all you can do is touch. So,
Yeah. All you
um,
can do is touch and then try to make meaning from that touch, so that the brain can, create a picture in its mind, and from all of the different information that our body allows us to have. But when we've got vision, we shut those other modalities down because it's all on face value, right? The camera never lies and things like that. But actually, that isn't the case. There's so much more than just what meets the eye.
so well put. So well put. And the Sense of Sculpture runs through November 1st in Wakefield. And I know this episode is going to run just before the exhibition closes. But if people want to learn more about this exhibition or you, what's the best way they can do that? I do know you have an Instagram account because I saw some of the pieces from the exhibition on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
Instagram is Dr. Victoria Clare.
Got it. And Claire is
CLAIRE.
Right, CLAIRE.
Yeah.
And you have a website that's chock full of great information.
Yes, that website is www.victoriaclaire-beyondvision.com.
Right, right. And if you just want to Google Dr. Victoria Claire, I think
Yes.
that they will find you.
Yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So again, if you're a LinkedIn user, again, just type in Dr. Victoria Clare.
Great. And Victoria, this has just been such a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much just talking to you without even looking at your work during this past 45 minutes or so. And I commend you for not only creating such wonderful art, but being such an ambassador for not only the visually impaired community, but people in general and how they can grow and learn and get over life's challenges. You're
Thank
doing
you.
incredible work.
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure that, you reached out and we started our conversation, and, the podcast is going out because it's all about reaching a wider audience and making a difference and creating change.
Exactly. Exactly. Well put. And to close out, I'd like to again thank Johnson & Johnson and Boehringer Ingelheim for sponsoring this episode. And listeners, thanks as always for joining Eye on the Cure. We look forward to having you back for the next episode.
This has been the Eye on the Cure podcast. To make an impact, donate now at fightingblindness.org.